This is the Game Changers Experience. Deep dive conversations with leading business disruptors, Olympic athletes, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and influencers from around the world. This show will teach you insights about the winning principles in mindset, productivity, marketing, branding, entrepreneurship, business strategy, and more. Hosted by productivity authority, business strategist, former elite athlete, author, and public speaker, Adam Strong.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Game Changers Experience with myself, Adam Strong. And today we've got another great show lined up. Today we're actually with a guy who I'd met actually probably a couple of months ago. He reached out to me and I loved his approach. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about connection, but a little bit different. So today's guest is Brenda Fong. Now, Brenda is on a mission to create a more deeply connected world. Now, I'll be questioning him about that because that's a really interesting thing. So before the age of 26, Brenda is, he's mastered the skill of connection to become a published author. He was running marketing for an online education company with 250,000 students. He's traveled 23 different countries, which is really impressive, with his wife, got featured on TV, launched his own podcast called 7 Figure Millennials, which is a top 2% global ranking podcast in less than a year. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, because Brandon is in that kind of like context of millennials, right? So 26 years of age, and I think he's the youngest guest that we've ever had on today's on the podcast, which is great. We're going to be talking about connection. We're also going to be talking about what he learned from his parents. We're going to be talking about the behavioral patterns of connection and what he's discovered. And we're also going to be talking about the great resignation and why young people these days are not attracted to the conventional ways of working. So without further ado, Brandon, welcome to the show.
Adam, with that introduction, I'm super excited to be here and always more energized after we talk. So excited to dive in today.
Very cool. Like it. Love it. You know, it's interesting because when you first reached out to me, one of the things that really sparked my interest was the fact that you're rubbing shoulders with some of the people that I hang around in my circles, people like Steve Sims, people like Sharon Lecter, who are huge influencers in their game. You know, they're not just 7-8 figure entrepreneurs. They're like New York Times bestselling authors and that kind of stuff. And I just thought that's pretty impressive for a 26-year-old. But I'd love to know more about what was really interesting, because I know that when you were younger, you kind of learn from getting free school meals or free school lunches, as you'd like to call it. And your parents taught you the importance of relationships, which is really interesting because normally if you, so this is where we kind of share the similar backgrounds, where we didn't come from a wealthy family. Well, I didn't, and you definitely didn't. And, but normally parents like that, if you don't come from a wealthy family, they normally say, son, go to school, go to university, go get a good job and live happily ever after. But your parents didn't teach you that context. But tell us a little bit more about that. How did that work?
Man, such a great question. And thank you so much for doing the homework, because I don't get to talk about my parents that much. And actually this past weekend was Father's Day. Unfortunately, my dad got COVID, so I didn't even get a chance to see him for Father's Day, which was terrible. But I actually just released tomorrow I'm releasing an episode on Father's Day and the lessons that I've learned from my dad. But I'm so grateful for my parents. And I think the biggest thing that I saw growing up is they always had a revolving door of people, of friends, of people that they were starting to work with in their businesses. And I think that the biggest aha for me was that I loved having adult, quote unquote, adult conversations. Like when I was in the school, when I was at recess in elementary school, I always talked to the lunch lady because I thought she was more interesting to talk to than my other friends, you know? And so I think that was kind of the love of people is really what I saw from my parents. And obviously I love to think about first principle things, like what are the things that are always going to be true? And I think that was the biggest thing I saw from them that was modeled. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a tactic. They just loved people. My mom is always looking at being energetic and connecting with people. And my dad's a super friendly guy and a little bit of a goofball too. And so I think that was kind of like the biggest thing is they encouraged me from a very, very young age to share my thoughts and experiences with people that were significantly older than me. They never put me at the quote unquote kids table during Christmas, during Thanksgiving. They asked me my thoughts. They asked me my opinions. And what I think really was incredible is that my parents like would encourage me that, and they would talk about how they were implementing some of the things I were doing. And I think it's really cool because kids do teach us really valuable things. My wife works with kids a lot, and they teach you some valuable lessons. So I just think it was that opening environment that my parents encouraged and taught me how to love and grow with people was the foundational concept that led to everything else.
Now, you just said that your parents also ran their own business. Is that right?
Yeah. So if I were to own a restaurant, I'd be like a fourth generation restaurant owner or something like that. So I grew up as the kid in the back of the restaurant that wasn't supposed to be in front of everyone. But yeah, so I always watched them modeling and growing a business. Yeah.
Now, did you ever wanted to take over your parents' restaurant when you were older?
So funny enough, I when I was in high school, I got to compete at a business plan competition. And so, of course, coming from a background of restaurateurs, I came up with this business plan called the Sizzlin' Ninja. It was a food truck. It was going to be this super cool thing. But I don't think I ever really wanted to it. But I think I didn't want to take over the restaurant, but I saw the growth that was associated with having to grow a business. I think that was what was so intriguing to me, is like, you have to come across your own demons every single day as an entrepreneur, as you learn and grow. And so I think that growth is one of my foundational values and things. And so that was really what attracted me, not necessarily running a restaurant, but the concept of growth and learning.
So interesting enough, because as I mentioned to the audience, I mean, you are the youngest guest that we've had on the podcast so far. So that's kind of interesting. So I'd like to know more about, like, how is it? I know that you said that you'd written a plan and you won. I believe you won a competition as well when you were younger. I mean, and your dad raised some money for you to go. And even though you didn't win, you learned so many lessons. What were those lessons during that contest?
Yeah. So this is one of my things that absolutely transformed my life, is I got to compete with that Sizzlin' Ninja business plan. But basically I took first place. I was on a high, super excited. I get to school the next day. I'm with my advisor and the other people that competed, and she slides the itinerary across the desk that has everything that we get to be doing. So I like rip it open, I'm leafing through it, and then my heart sinks because I see the bottom number at the last page shows the cost of the trip. And I went to the funny thing about the whole free lunch thing is I went to a relatively wealthy school district. It's one of the wealthiest zip codes in the state if you look it up. So it's like I was open enrolled, and I was one of the few kids that was on the free lunch program. So like I hated the fact that most of my friends could just ask for whatever they want and they got it. But like I had to figure out a way to do it. And I hated it back then. But now I look at that, it's like, oh my God, that was the most valuable lesson I could have ever learned, is learning how to do things and figure things out. And so that line, that cost of the trip, I came home that day and my dad was like, well, let's turn this into an opportunity. And so he introduced me to my first ever mentor. Her name was Brenda Campbell. She's the president of a nonprofit organization. And my dad's thinking was, she knows how to fundraise. This can be an incredible lesson for you if you learn how to fundraise. And so Brenda absolutely transformed my life. She was one of those dominoes for me that has knocked over many other things, but she taught me the core foundational principles of how to connect with people. And so she introduced me to some people within her network with the context that I was looking to build and fundraise for my trip. And she told me one thing that I still understand deeper meanings to it today, but it transformed everything, is if you ask for money, you get advice, but if you ask for advice, you'll get money. And I didn't really understand what that meant until Brenda was like, let me show you what that means. So she introduced me to these people. My email address was asianninja221@gmail.com. And so not the most professional email address. I'm 16 years old, and she introduces me to these high caliber people. And sure enough, they contributed to my trip, and $100 at a time. And I'm 2 weeks short of going on the trip. I'm $500 short. And she introduced me to one other person. She's like, I can't believe I didn't introduce you to Kevin Kowalski. He's a pretty big deal in the area. So I'm nervous to talk to this guy. But I talked to him, give him my pitch, and he asked me, Brandon, how much do you have left to pay for the trip? I'm like, well, I'm like $500 short. The trip is just in a few weeks. And so he kind of smiles and he pulls out his checkbook and he writes on it. I don't want to be rude, so I don't want to sit and stare at what he's writing, but he puts it in an envelope and says, good luck, man. And of course, if you're listening to this, what would be the first thing that you do as soon as you step through the door? Of course, you're going to rip that thing open. And I found out that Kevin contributed $500 to that remaining amount that I needed to go to the trip. And so the lesson that I learned from that, and what Brenda really opened the doors to me, is that like, if you learn how to build relationships, it is a shortcut, a non-traditional way of approaching things. And Brenda, that one relationship with Brenda transformed everything for me. So who is that one relationship for you that can open those doors? And how do you actually do that? How do you actually build those kinds of relationships based on core foundational principles? So I didn't end up placing at the national competition, but that was the biggest lesson learned. And from there out, I started to leverage the power of connection to connect and learn from super high caliber people. And it wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for Brenda seeing something in Asian Ninja 221, 16-year-old Brandon.
By the way, have you still got that email address?
I do, but I don't check it. You can send it, but it's just gonna go to. Feel free to shoot me an email there.
Yeah, I'm sure that the audience right now, we're trying to write that down as fast as they can, so they can see if they can actually check the email, see if it's legit. So I was just kind of
it's legit. It's a spam email that I probably don't even know how to log into it anymore.
So funny, so funny. Interesting enough, you know, there's one thing that you pointed out there which was really interesting. If you ask for money, you get advice. If you get ask advice, you get money. So let me ask you a question. What advice did you ask for?
Great question. I was looking for feedback on my business plan. So this is something that I've learned that I think is really, really curious about human relationships is, do you have Build-A-Bear on the other side of the pond, Adam? You know,
okay.
So it's like, yeah. So why does Build-A-Bear, why can they charge approximately $80 bajillion for a stuffed bear, right? And the reason why is because the kids have to invest in it, right? It's a whole experience. They pump it up, they put the stuffing in, they put the heart in. Yep. And the same goes for, there's a study about IKEA furniture that we value IKEA furniture. We were just talking before, Adam's recording this from Sweden. So I studied abroad in Sweden. So but like people value IKEA furniture. Why? Because they had to build it. You had to sit frustrated cussing at the instructions with the screws and stuff like that. And so you had to invest in it. And so that is one of the things I've learned about relationships, is that you have to contribute and show up and add value. And I think this is a kind of an elementary way that I learned this. Obviously, I had some help from a mentor, but the more that you can be appreciative and grateful of people once they provided you with insights and feedback, that was just transformational for me. So like in many ways, those relationships strengthened because I was so grateful for the impact that they made on me. And I always updated them. Hey, this is how I got to nationals, or this is what I learned from it. Thank you so much. I'd send them a handwritten thank you notes. And so I think that as you continue to invest in relationships and as you invest in other things, you value it a lot more. So to answer your question succinctly, I was asking for feedback on my business plan, but what they were really investing in, I think, was me. And I think that the more that you can contribute and add value and share the value that people are providing in your life, the stronger those relationships get.
Love it. Very cool. Excellent. So interestingly enough, this moves beautifully into my next question, by the way. So you talk in your LinkedIn profile, because and so everyone knows, all the guests know, all the listeners know that when I bring guests on, awesome guests, I do my homework, right? So in your LinkedIn profile, it states, I quote, your mission is to create a deeply connected world. But what does a deeply connected world mean to you? And how do you know once you've accomplished that goal?
That's a great question, Adam. I think that some of these big ambitions that we have require a different level of considering what the core components that go into the problem actually is. So it's kind of a way of me stumbling and saying, when I go back throughout my life, I had something recently happen to me where I had to kind of go back and look at the core components that I think made me. And I looked at all the stories, like going back to the free lunch program, to having conversations with Mrs. Dunn as the lunchroom supervisor instead of the kids, and connecting with Brenda Campbell. And I kind of plotted all these stories out, and I realized that this theme of connection emerges. And when I say connection, I want to clarify and say that I mean connection in every sense of the word. I mean, connecting deeper with myself is a really component. I'm very introspective. I journal. I do lots of reflecting on experiences. I love connecting with other people. And I also love connecting other people with other resources and things that can help them grow and on their journey. So those are some of the ways and things that connection means to me. So I think I'm doing that in many ways right now as a podcaster, because it is the greatest expression of that need of connection because I get to have these conversations and share them with other people. But I think that in today's world, we're becoming so disconnected. We're forgetting what it's like to be human online. That is where we were talking about LinkedIn. You see all this crap where people are copying and pasting the same messages and shouting from a rooftop. And like, if COVID has taught us anything, it's like how important these relationships really, really are. Yeah. And so when I say I'm looking at creating a more deeply connected world, the way that I'm acting on that right now is by podcasting, is by contributing and helping and supporting other podcasters on their journeys. And the way that manifests, I think I'm learning greater and greater what that means. But I know that at the core of what I will always focus on is helping people to become more deeply connected. And the way that will change and move throughout the years may change and move. And I may have a different answer. So hopefully that answers Adam, but like that's the core of what I think is what brings me here.
Very cool. Awesome. So interestingly enough, because I mean, I suppose you kind of had this, I'm going to call this awakening, whatever you want to call it, right? From, I guess the age of 16, right? Would you say about, yeah? Okay, cool. So you've had like 10 years of really good groundwork in the world of connection, right? So let me ask you a question. What have you found? Now, when we think about human connection, obviously that can mean potentially different, from a strategic perspective, right? It can mean different things, right? And how you do it. What have you found that has worked, like for the listeners in, because I'm big into connection, as I mentioned to you offline. What have you found that works really well from a technical perspective, or maybe from a strategic perspective, and what doesn't work well? Are there any kind of patterns that you may, or experiments? I'm going to call them experiments because I'm big into experiments. What are some of the experiments that, or the approaches that you have created, that you've like, hey, so I'm going to approach it this way because I haven't done it this way, and then it was like, no, that didn't work, right? So I'm going to go back to this way because that way was more efficient. What's your thoughts on that?
Great question. So I can teach, I have this framework that I've created. I call it the magic connection method. And this is kind of my distillation of everything that I've learned. But you asked the question in a very unique way. So I kind of want to make sure I answer that before I just dive into a framework and what I went through to kind of create this. So like let me quickly fill in the gaps on some things here. My senior year of college, I reached out to a really successful entrepreneur, and this will tie to some of the career stuff too. So I'm planting seeds for other parts in the interview. But like I saw a entrepreneur that I really respected. His name was Jonathan Levy, and he had a company that was doing really well. And I was just some 21-year-old college kid. What value did I have to provide to him? So how do I get his attention and really add value and support him on his journey? So I sent him an email that went something along these lines. It was like, hey, Jonathan, I listened to episode 23 or 47, I don't know the episode number, with Noah Kagan. And I took it and I implemented it. Thank you so much for the impact that you made in my life. That was obviously kind of more general than I would be. I was way more specific when I sent that. But then the next part of it was I went a little bit deeper on what you're focused on. And I saw that there are 3 potential projects that I could do that I think would add a ton of value to you. I would love to do these for you for free. If you like my work, we can figure out a way that we can move forward, and that would be great. And if not, you didn't pay anything, and we can part our separate ways. So that email changed my life because he got back to me 12 hours later and said, dude, we need to talk. We ended up working together on that project, and he offered to pay me. And I'm like, I do not want to get paid. Like I'm very clear about this. Like I want to show that I can add value here. And that turned into 3 years of me ending up running his marketing. I was on the team when we added over 100,000 students to his online courses, 1.5 million downloads to the podcast. Jonathan got into this really high level group called Genius Network. If you're listening, you're not familiar with it. It's a high-end group of 7, 8, 9-figure entrepreneurs, really cool people. Jonathan goes to his first meeting, sends me a Slack message. He's like, dude, I need you to come to these meetings. I'm like, oh my God. And so I had the opportunity to be 22 years old and participate and connect with people that were inside of Genius Network, these really high level people. So that was the first ever magic connection method-ish email that I wasn't even really understanding. But another thing I observed, because you asked the question this way, was when I was running that email list with hundreds of thousands of students, I realized the power of creating one-to-one conversations, even though you're doing one-to-many. And I think that it's really important is I worked a lot in our email marketing to open up conversations where they would reply and I would actually engage with them and allow them to lean in instead of just shoving something in their face, because like there's lots of rooftop marketing in today's world. And so I thought that was an interesting that worked really well. I obviously saw the pattern of connecting with Jonathan, and I just thought, I think about the way humans like to be approached with things that we, like I said going before, we love to buy, but we hate to be sold. So like, how do you actually create an environment where people are leaning in and are curious about what you have to say instead of, and coming from a place of value instead of just trying to sell someone something? So those were some of the seeds that I observed that went into this Magic Connection Method framework. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Adam, as somebody that is a huge connector yourself on some of the stuff as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the saying that I picked up from there really, and I think that you listeners that you're listening to today's show is when you approached Jonathan, is that you gave him a no-brainer offer, which was effectively you would work for free and there would be zero risk to him. So you took the risk element out. So therefore you've completely lowered his barriers, and I'm sure he would have done his homework and his due diligence on you or whatever it might be, right? To check out if you're the legit guy, right? So that was a really interesting story. So I just want to say that was a good one. I like that. And yeah.
Can I just add on top of that, Adam?
Yeah.
I'll just say one thing really quick. There's a quote by Dean Jackson that I love and I think is super, super relevant right here. And it's a compelling offer is 10 times more powerful than a convincing argument. A compelling offer is 10 times more powerful than a convincing argument. And I think that is a really huge component of like, how can you show up and create compelling offers instead of trying to convince people of something? And so I think that that's kind of another commonality that I noticed that made it into some of my work later, but I appreciate that you pulled it out because it's like, how can you create an irresistible offer? And I think that that's one where lots of magic happens.
Yep, absolutely. Love it. So I was going to say, I kind of mentioned something else as well offline, which again, I find is really kind of important. It's something that we've had numerous experts actually here, from professors through to, not just professors, but, best-selling authors talking about connections. And one thing that as not really, well, especially from my perspective, something that really fascinates me, and it's more of a fascination more than anything else, which is the psychology around connection, right? Which is the understanding of what people do in terms of from a behavior perspective, so what we're talking about is, you've shared some great stories about how people could potentially approach, from a technical perspective, but from a psychological perspective, I'd love to talk a little bit about like what people are thinking. Like, what are you thinking when it comes to connections? Like, one of the things, like from my perspective, and I'll just again share from experience, is that I'm not expecting anything, because I believe that if you have expectations, you'll always be disappointed. So that's kind of like from my perspective, that's my kind of psychological trait on connection. But what's yours?
Mm-hmm. So I think that there's several things that go into this. My brain just went 30 different places. So I'll answer the first thing that came up into my mind is basically, I think that we lose sight of the fact that you as humans, one of the things that you most appreciate is someone actually takes the time to care about you. It's one of those like, my mom taught me this as a 5-year-old kind of a thing, but it's like so true. And I don't have any scientific studies to base on this, but it's like, if you go to a conversation, I'll challenge you as a listener. The next time you meet someone new, see how little you can talk about yourself. See how curious you can be about the person in front of you, and they will tell you that you're the most interesting person on the planet, right? And it's because you actually took the time to care about them. It's like when I was getting to know Adam and seeing the stuff that was on his site, I know that he trained with a really incredible Olympian, and he has this incredible story about collecting golf balls, and it's like those are all things that like are so important for us to, you light up when you have the opportunity to share those things. So this is an insight that comes from when I run my show, but I spend a lot of time thinking about the first question that I will ask, because it opens the door to incredible things from the guests. Like I had on Mo Gaudat, the former chief business officer of Google X, on my podcast, and he wrote the book Solve for Happy. And I asked him the question, Mo, I found out in my research that one of your most prized possessions is a small unopened container of hand cream. Can you tell us why that is? And so I will not answer that question. So you have to go listen to the episode with Mo, because it was one of the favorites I've ever done. But like, it shows that I did the research. It's really engaging for the person. And like, it took the time to actually do the research on someone. So I'd say that is one of the core foundational things when it comes to connection and relationships is really taking the time to learn and care about the people that you want to build relationships with. And I think, as I've heard Brian Kurtz say, and as you alluded to, it's like the 100-0 approach. It's like, I choose the people that I reach out to in the sense that I want to add value. And if we can work together, that is fantastic. That'd be great. But if not, I'm going to figure out a way to invest in the relationship. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to contribute to some of the people that I build these relationships with. So I think if you have that approach of like adding value, getting to really know people, connecting them with other incredible people, that goes really, really far.
You know, it's interesting that you picked up a really good point. And actually, you know, I want to share a quick experience. So last week I was in London, and I went to my first networking live, as in face-to-face networking event, for about 2.5 years. Crazy, yeah? And and it felt kind of weird, right? Not that I'm kind of like super scared of people or anything, but it just felt kind of weird, right? And I suppose like it's interesting because you just brought up a really interesting point. You said, as you quote unquote, you said, get the other person to go first and try to not talk about yourself. And that's, again, I suppose, I wouldn't say it's kind of like a technique that I use, but I always have that at the back of my mind, because I'm always fascinated to learn about others rather than me talk about myself. Because, hey, I'm no one special, but that's how I see myself, type of thing. And it's just interesting. And I got so many compliments last week. It's like, you're an interesting guy. You answer great questions. It's what, you know, and it wasn't like I was kind of, you know, it wasn't like a radio show. I didn't want them to feel like they were on a radio show and I was interviewing like a special guest or anything, but it was just kind of like really fascinating. But anyway, I digress. I'd love to talk about more about, we've got connection in the digital world, which is kind of like online. And then we've got connection offline, which is kind of like more face-to-face. How do they differentiate between the two? And in terms of technique perspectives, the double-ended question here, in terms of technique-wise, how do they also differ in terms of the approach?
That's a really good question. I think that we have our guards up online. We've literally forgotten how to be humans online. It's kind of fun.
I agree.
It's kind of funny. Like here's an interesting comparison. It's like you've ever been cut off before while you're driving. It's like there's all these terrible drivers, but in your mind, you're never the terrible driver, right? Like you've never cut anyone off. It's like all these other, you're the best driver ever, right? And so it's like we kind of forget. It's the same thing in the connection world. It's like, think about the last few messages you sent. Like, did you take the time to appreciate them? Like, did you take the time to really figure out what was valuable for them and, you know, open the doors to a conversation? Or was it more straightforward and like you were just kind of like, hey, hope you've been great since the last time we talked? Like, I probably spent a stupid amount of time. Like here's an example. I was reconnecting with someone the other day, and I was sending them this message, and I could have sent, hey, hope you've been doing well since we talked last. But I'm like, I know the last time we talked, his daughter was moving out, and that was really important. And like, I wanted to make sure that I referenced that specific thing. And I'm like, I need to find out his daughter's name. And I don't want to say wasted, but I spent 15 minutes on Facebook trying to figure out his daughter's name so that I could say, hey man, like I know the last time we talked, like Maya was moving out and it was something that was going on. I hope like that went really, really well. Like I took the time to do that. And I think that it's really, really important that we actually do that kind of stuff, because the difference between online and offline is that I think when you're online, you're competing with all these bots, all this crap that's being copied and pasted all the time. And our filters are slightly different when you're reading something or if you're being approached online than if someone's walking up to you. But like, man, like if like I watched Impractical Jokers. I don't know if that's a show that you've ever
I've
watched.
heard of
Adam,
that. Yeah. I've heard of that.
like or like here's another example. I do improv. I've done improv, and there's this thing called blind line where they will get suggestions from the audience and they'll write it on a piece of paper, and then all throughout the skit, like they'll have to pause the middle of the skit and pick up from the blind line and read from it. Imagine if you had to read the crap that you're seeing online as like a blind line at a real networking event. Like all that stuff would not fly if it was like, hey, saw that we had some mutual connections in common, would love to connect. Like you wouldn't say that to someone in person, like it, but suddenly it's okay to do online, you know? So I don't know. I think that's some of the approaches, is that our antennas are up, we're protected, we're guarded online, because there is an ability to use bots and spam and do all this kind of stuff that's online, that's not obviously available in the real world. But obviously I think it's important to be in integrity and alignment with both, with the both in-person and the online component.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually having this interesting conversation with a really good friend of mine who's a best-selling author last week in London. And we know someone, we have a mutual friend. She's super successful, 7-figure entrepreneur. And one of the things that he mentioned, actually, I didn't bring it up, but I absolutely congruently agreed with him, was the fact that, you know, it's so important that if someone reached out to you, whether it be you, me, or whoever it is, and you reach out to somebody, right? It's important to get back to them and be human, right? And not have some automated bot or some personal assistant or 15 different barriers because it's like you kind of cut yourself up in terms of accessibility. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and I don't know if you've ever come across this, and maybe it's this because of like their status, or if they're high celebrity, you know, if they're, I don't know, if they're like on Shark Tank or whatever it might be. But do you find that, you know, if there is a gatekeeper, as an example, right? Or a number of gatekeepers, and it's like you want to get access to a particular person, right? They have made it so difficult to build connection that you think, screw it. I'm going to give up. Has there ever been a time like that for you where you thought, you know what, this isn't working, I'm just going to move on?
That's a good question. I found that most of the really high level connections that I've been blessed to get on my show have come through a warm introduction, and you can eliminate all gatekeepers when it comes to a warm introduction. Like, here's a really quick story about how I got Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank on my show. Well, cool. Actually, earlier on in college, I actually met him very briefly when he was speaking, and I connected with his assistant, and I ended up getting an endorsement on my book that I wrote in college from Kevin, which was incredible, but he probably didn't even really remember it. But then it was funny how this all came full circle, because this is just why I love podcasting so much. But like, I had on a hypnotist on my show. His name is Tim Schur. I gave him a great interview. I spent a lot of time investing in doing good interviews for people. I get off with him and he's like, oh, you should have on my friend Waldo Waldman. So he introduced me to Waldo. Waldo's a decorated air fighter pilot. He's flown 65 combat missions, Top Gun Maverick kind of guy, you know, like really professional Hall of Fame speaker and all that good stuff. And so have a great conversation with him. And he's like, hey, I'm really good friends with Kevin Harrington. Do you think you'd want Kevin Harrington on the show? And I'm not asking for any of these, like, right. which is the kind of the crazy part. But like, I mean, I obviously they know I want good relationships for guests on the show, but then he offered to introduce me to Kevin because he's good friends with Kevin. Like, he's like, it's not just like, oh, it's just this dude, like he knows Kevin. And so he went above and beyond for me and like reached out to Kevin and like made sure it was cool. And then he made that introduction. And I never even I don't think I ever even talked to his assistant. Like, I don't know if his assistant was away or something like that, but I think I literally scheduled with Kevin. I was like, does this time work? And he responded and said, yes, let's get it on the calendar. So like, I found that lots of these incredible people that I've had the opportunity of getting connected with. Obviously, one other thing I want to say is like, a gatekeeper isn't another gatekeeper. They're another human. You know, so it's like, if you do have to work with a gatekeeper or somebody that is an assistant that is setting up a time, like, God, like I always take the time. I'm like, hey, it's so great to meet you. Like, I appreciate you so much for helping us really coordinate this time. It really means so much. Like, and like going about, like, those are really important too, because I mean, it just matters. Like, you just try to do all this stuff. But yeah, to answer your question, I haven't really hit up against the gatekeeper as an issue where I've just given up, like kind of the way you framed the question. But I think that following up is so important. We can obviously talk about this as a separate topic, but like people have stuff going on in their lives, and like it's important to follow up in an authentic way without being annoying about it. I think it took several times for us to connect, Adam, and you were busy, you were traveling, you know, it's like, it's not, and so like, but I think that's kind of an important thing to think about too, is like, maybe it's not necessarily a gatekeeper issue, but maybe it is a timing issue. And sometimes I think the first thing when somebody's not responding, it's like, oh, they hate me, and like they're thinking I'm being an idiot or whatever. But like if you actually follow the framework that I've developed, where we may or may not have time to go into it, but it's like if you're expressing appreciation for someone, how can you really get mad at someone? Like maybe it's not a good fit for whatever you're proposing, but if you took the time to care about them, the worst thing that's going to happen is most likely it's just not a good fit, which isn't even like a big deal. You know, you just move on.
You know, it's interesting. In my trip to London last week, I'm going to go back to my trip to London now. One of my friends who I sat down, he treated me to lunch, which was really nice of him. And he said to me, he was on one of the big news channels. So he was interviewed, you know, on live TV, on Sky News more specifically. And so one of the things that he did to make it more memorable, he actually sent them a hamper as a thank you gesture, just to say thanks very much for the opportunity, you know, thanks for the connection, you know, and he wanted to leave that memory, and he got a massive thank you and appreciation. No one's ever done that for us. Have you ever been in that position where you valued the connection so much that you'd send something, whether it be a gift or whatever it might be, and you thought, you know what? I really value our relationship. And, you know, what was the outcome of that? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I had on, I don't know if you know John Rulin. He created this company called Giftology, and he literally, this is what he studies, is creating incredible world-class gifts for someone instead of sending the crappy gifts and all that kind of stuff. So if you want a deep dive on the subject, John Rulin's a master, and I'll just share one insight that I learned from him. Is like, he talks a lot about when you're gifting to think about the frequency of the use. Lots of people will send like a gift card or like a consumable product or something like that. And like one of the things that he gifts is kitchen items, knives, because think about the amount of exposure and the amount of time that somebody is using a knife in their kitchen and thinking about you versus some other crappy thing. And also, he always talks about giving best in class gifts, which is another really important thing. Is like, if somebody's super wealthy and they wear really nice watches, even if you spend $1,000 on a watch, like they're going to be like, thanks, but I'm not taking this off for being the beautiful watch that I'm wearing, you know. It's like, so what he talks about is doing best in class gifts, where he, like, an example that I heard him talk about on the episode is like a luggage tag. Like, if you only have $200 to spend $200 on the most badass luggage tag that someone's ever going to get. And every single time they're traveling, they're going to think about you in that luggage tag. Long way of saying, I don't know, I don't have it on right now, and I'm spoiling a surprise a little bit, Adam, because I do this for my podcast guests. But one of the things that I do for thank you notes is I send 3D glasses. I take a handwritten note and I send them 3D glasses in the mail, because I love the concept of lumpy mail, of sending a hamper and all that kind of stuff. But what I do is I create, there's this site online, I'm not going to remember what it is, but like you can create a hidden pixelated image, and I could type it out and say, thank you, Adam, on it. And it would just look like a bunch of green and blue and red pixelated things. And then what I do is I'll send a thank you note with the 3D glasses, so it's a little bit of a thicker envelope or whatever, and you open it up, and I'd say something along, and I'm ruining it for you, Adam, because I know you're going to come on my show. I'll probably send you this, so I'll have to do something different. But it'll be something along the lines of like, hey, Adam, thank you so much for sharing what you shared on the show. I love the new lens and perspective that you shared, and you know, something very specific. You're going to need these 3D glasses to decode a secret message. Can't use the red side. So then, like, you got this thank you note, and you had to pull it out. You put the glasses on, you have to look, and then you see, and it has like a 3D image for you. So I think that it's really important, and like those small things, I mean, whatever, it takes me 5 minutes to write that message and stuff it in there, but like those things are really important to build relationships, I think, to go above and beyond. So really interesting question.
Very cool. Yeah, really interesting question. I love that. You mentioned around the magic connection formula. I think that's what you said, right? The three. Just give us a little bit of an That's right. Yeah. So give us a little bit of an overview about what that looks like.
Yeah. I'm just being mindful of time. How much do you want me to give the slightly extended version, or like the quick and fun method?
We can get
Okay,
that.
we'll go with okay. So I will share with you as an exclusive for Game Changers. I'm teaching this slightly different now because I came up with an acronym that expresses this better, like literally this morning. So like you're some of the first few people that I've ever heard it express. So it's the same concept. I just made it into a new acronym. So the acronym spells AVE for avenue, like an avenue to build a relationship with someone.
Got it.
So the first thing is appreciate. You want to take the time to really show that you did your research, the stuff that I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but it's like, listen to an episode of the podcast, say something specific that can literally not be copy and pasted to another human being, except for the person that you're reaching out to. So really take the time to appreciate someone. The next thing is value. What is the value that you can provide to this person? Going back to the conversation that the story I shared about Jonathan Levy, I thought about his perspective. What does he need? What is he looking for? What are those projects that I can help support for him? If you have a podcast, you can invite them to be on your show. You can introduce them to other potential connections. If you're getting on another show, what do they care about? They care about, like Adam cares so much about you listening right now. Like he's not bringing on everyone to just share some stuff and pitch crap to you. Like that's really important that people have taken the time to think about the value that they're adding to you as an audience. So if you're reaching out to a podcaster, what is the value that you are providing them and their audience? Always think about it from their perspective. Going back before, a compelling offer is 10 times more powerful than a convincing argument. What are the ways that you can add tons of value to someone and open the doors to these relationships? Obviously, these are for the relationships that are big deals. They may take time to build and nurture and grow, but like this is the way we love being expressed. So anyways, you took the time to appreciate them. You took the time to figure out how to add value to them. The last thing you do, the E, so appreciate value. The last thing, E, is end with a question. So there's lots of psychology, and you're talking about this, Adam. I was like, there's several things that go into this sentence, and I won't explain all of it. But at the end, if somebody is skimming a message, and we talked about like all this crap online, right? Like you want to make sure it's very easy for them to respond. So you have to end with a question. And the way that I end that question is 100% based on choice. Like I said before, we hate to have stuff shoved in our face, and we love to make a decision and lean in if we want to. So at this point, I'll just share the like a closing question I might use, and then I'll run through the whole thing, what it might look like. So a question I'll use is 100% up to you, but would you be opposed to me sending over next steps to XYZ, right? And so it's not let's book a time on my calendar, here's my calendar link, right? It's asking a question to see if they're interested in it. And if they're interested in it, then they'll respond. And you may think it's a little backwards. Like, why wouldn't I just send them the calendar link if they could book and it's simpler? It's because like you want them to actually invest and lean into it. So again, appreciate, took the time to care about them, value, you took the time to find something that was super valuable for them, and E, end with a question so that it's very clear. And the emails that you are not answering right now, I guarantee you listening to this right now, you open up your email inbox. What's the email you haven't responded to? It's the one that took time, energy, effort. You got to go do the thing and do blah, 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 blah. The ones that you respond to are the ones that are super easy to respond to. So if you got an email just like this, you can respond with, sweet, sounds good, like less than a sentence. And so that's the high level framework that anyone could use if you want an avenue to approach high level relationships. Appreciate, value, and with a question.
Very cool. Very good. So that by the way, I hope you kind of got that down, guys. And by the way, what I would highly recommend you do is that if you felt like it was like super fast, pause this recording, rewind it, and listen to it again, because there's like a ton of golden nuggets just in that small, tiny bit of framework. So listen, I'm also consciously aware of time and stuff. But first of all, I just want to say this has been a great jam. It's been great conversations, right? And so, but I'd love to know, like, how is it that people, number one, can get hold of the framework? So to learn more about that. But number two, what's the best way for people to connect with you? Yeah.
So I would highly encourage, if you want that framework, if you want to think about it and see it and broken down, if you go to bfo.ng/GCA for Game Changers Audio, I will put that as a short link for you guys to grab that. And because I taught it very differently today, it's not going to have the same abbreviation, but it's the same concept, right? So, I mean, maybe I'll even change it by the time this goes live. So that's the easiest thing to do there. But if you want to go and figure out why the former chief business officer of Google X's most prized position is a small and open container of hand cream. I would highly encourage you to go check out my podcast, 7-Figure Millennials. It's all about prioritizing our happiness, health, and relationships as we make our entrepreneurial dreams a reality. I teach it as not the guru on top of the mountain, but rather the guy that is building his first 7-figure business and sharing what's working along the way. So I would highly encourage you to follow me on that journey. Hopefully this isn't too crazy, Adam, but if anybody wants to shoot me an email, Brandon@brandonfong.co, and I will do my best to respond. And I appreciate you so much, Adam, for having me on, and would love to connect with anybody that's hanging out with us today.
Very cool. And just on that note, guys, if you didn't get all of that, we are also going to put the links below. So we're going to put all the links below. So do click on any of the links. And if you do reach out to Brendan, do mention this particular podcast, and they can kind of put 2 and 2 together. So first of all, I just want to say thanks very much to you, Brendan. I really appreciate your time today. I hope that you how you felt we had some fun.
We did. This was a blast. Thank you for asking some thought-provoking questions, Adam. I've had to go deeper and answer in a much different way this time. So I appreciate you doing that.
Well, that's what we do. We go deep. We go deep, right? As Eddie Murphy would say. Anyway, guys, enough about going deep and deep connection. Hope you've enjoyed today's exciting episode. Do me a favor, if you have enjoyed today's episode, please follow the steps below and give us a 1 or a 5-star review. I prefer a 5-star, but hey, if you want to do 1 star, whatever it is, right? On Apple or Spotify, we really greatly appreciate you. And thanks very much for being a great supporter and great listener of today. And hopefully you'll see us again on the next Game Changers Experience. Take care and see you soon. Cheers now. Hey guys, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I would love to hear from you guys. Please do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and click on the notification bell button below so that you don't miss out on some of the episodes that we've got coming up. Also, please make a comment in the comment section below. We are reaching out to some of our listeners so that we can get an understanding about how we can personalize some of the great content that we've got coming out based on your needs and aspirations. My other word of advice as well is to go to our amazing Facebook community where you can meet other creative entrepreneurs and business owners. Introduce yourself, say hi, mention about some of the amazing breakthroughs that you're getting through some of the episodes, and network, right? Grow your business. You are with who you become with the 5 most common people you hang around with. So listen, guys, hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care and see you soon. Bye-bye.